Greetings, everyone. My name is Philomena O'Brien, and I'm glad you could join us today for the PrimeVigilance webinar titled The Importance of a Full Understanding of the Pharmacovigilance System Master File within and outside of the EU. Before we commence, I'd like to run through a couple of quick housekeeping matters. Firstly, we expect this webinar presentation to run for approximately 30 minutes, with a short amount of time for questions and answers at the end. And secondly, you're very welcome to send us your questions at any point throughout the presentation. You can do this by typing them into the question box that you'll see on your screen. And now I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today, Marcela Fialova and Jana Hyankova. Jana, I think the plan is for you to start the presentation, so I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are gonna go through 3 points today. So contents of the today's webinar is we will go through regions and countries requiring a description of the pharmacovigilance system. We will then also talk about forms of this description and availability to agencies. And then we will also go through options for keeping descriptions of pharmacovigilance systems for various regions or countries consistent with the company. So you will see that there might be different ways of description, how we can take it, how the global company might handle this. And you will also see that there is no correct way in this. There are certain pros and cons why we decide or how company might decide which way they will choose. So moving to the first slide, to regions and countries requiring a description of the pharmacovigilance system. Looking at map that we have here, so you can see that there are some countries or regions that don't require any description of pharmacovigilance system. This is, for example, USA, you can see also Switzerland or Australia or Japan. So there are no requirements on keeping description of pharmacovigilance system master file. So these are the red countries on the map. On the other hand, we have a lot of countries or regions in which you have to keep some sort of description of pharmacovigilance system. So starting with Brazil through some African countries like Tunisia, or you can see, of course, European Union. I assume that you are familiar with this region and with these requirements. On the other hand, we have also Arab countries, India requirements, or Russia and other ex-Soviet countries, in which certain description of pharmacovigilance system is required. Let's look into legislative background. I assume that most of you are probably familiar with European Union and the requirements within the European Union. So description or certain parts of directive are talking about description of PSMF, of pharmacovigilance system, and talking about pharmacovigilance system master file. The same you can expect in regulation. You can see the number, and in Commission implementing regulation. But the most important document for us is GVP Module 2. In GVP Module 2, you can see certain chapters and the structure of the Pharmacovigilance System Master File. So this structure is specified by Module 2, GVP Module 2. But even within EU, it is not that easy because, for example, France, of course, follows EU legislation. However, they also have their own good pharmacovigilance practice from February 2018, and detailed description of the pharmacovigilance system set up in France is described there. So it complicates our situation in the EU. And moving somehow outside the EU, we are coming to United Kingdom. And we know that until 31st of December 2020, EU legislation should be followed by United Kingdom. But what is going to happen after the 1st of January 2021? Guidance on qualified person responsible for pharmacovigilance, including Pharmacovigilance System Master File, from the 1st of January 2021 was issued by MHRA on the 1st of September 2020. So you can see that this is fairly new legislation published. And in fact, the legislation says that marketing authorization holder must maintain and make available upon request of the MHRA a PSMF that describes the pharmacovigilance system for UK authorized products. There are also some complications with different parts of the UK. However, a single pharmacovigilance system master file is possible, of course, if we are talking about one pharmacovigilance system. However, we can again assume that new additional guidance will be supplemented by the exception and modifications to the EU guidance on GVP that apply to UK marketing authorization holders, which will be published in due course. So you can see that we have to follow legislation in the UK to know more about, let's say, local specificities in UK. And we are still staying in Europe, but outside the EU. For example, Switzerland, but you can remember that on the map it was marked red, so it means that Switzerland doesn't require any description of pharmacovigilance system. However, if we raised this question to Swissmedic, so we got the following answer, that Swiss version of the PSMF is not required. However, the submission of the PSMF to Swissmedic should be done only on request, and Swissmedic also recommends that the Swiss affiliate should have an access to the PSMF. So you can see again that there is no legislation, but on direct request from authority, there might be certain understanding or explanation of what the specific authority requires. Then we have Serbia, and you can see that they have legislation describing detailed description of pharmacovigilance system that is required in Serbia. And structure is specified in Annex 1 of the rule book. Then moving to Euro-Asian Economic Union. So again, there is certain legislation on PSMF that is required, and even the structure is specified in GVP, EEA EU GVP Chapter 3. So again, there is guideline that is talking about PSMF. And then coming to Ukraine, again, PSMF is required. So, and structure is again specified by standard guidance. Medicine's good pharmacovigilance practice. So you can see from this piece that requirements on PSMF might differ. And we were talking mostly about Europe. So now moving outside Europe, so Marcela will explain or will continue with requirements outside Europe.
Okay, thank you, Jana. So let's continue in our journey and move to Middle East and North Africa region. Let me focus on a guideline published 5 years ago by Arab League countries, which is a regional organization in the Arab world currently consisting of more than 20 members in the region, and there are also 4 observers. So you may see on this slide, I have selected 3 countries as an example illustration of harmonized approach for the members of Arab League, which is further elaborated in national guidelines. So we have here Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Tunisia. However, let me indeed start with the guideline on GVP for Arab countries, which is very much based on EU GVP. However, there are important differences, and this applies also to the area of description of the PV system. Indeed, Arab League guidelines requires a description of PV system in given Arab country in the structure of PSMF. However, the guideline also recognizes that the PV system in individual Arab country may not be the exclusive and independent PV system, and that in case of multinational companies, this is in fact part or subsystem of their global pharmacovigilance system. In such a case, Arab countries actually expect 2 documents, EU PSMF and National Pharmacovigilance Subsystem File. And again, in majority of countries, the same structure as we know from EU PSMF is expected, also for this Pharmacovigilance Subsystem File. But let me name, for example, United Arab Emirates, where national file has a slightly different structure. And there are also other differences. For example, PSMF must be submitted to agencies under certain conditions, on contrary to EU, or must be provided with a different number of days to the agency on request. Arab League countries' guideline talks about 14 days, whilst some local guidelines are speaking about 7 days, as we are used to in EU. If we continue with pharmacovigilance rules in other parts of the world, let me talk about India. India is not a part of Arab League, but is the observer. So one would think and expect that the rules may be somehow similar. However, in India, there was a guidance published 2 years ago describing the PV system and the requirements for it. And however, although it's called Pharmacovigilance System Master File, as you may see, different abbreviation is used, and indeed, the structure differs a lot from the EU PSMF. The system should be described in 5 chapters, focusing on pharmacovigilance officer or responsible person, organization structure, sources of safety data, PV processes, and performance, plus annexes. So although the content is similar, some sections required by EU PSMF are missing at all. Then let me mention that two ICH regions, Japan and USA, do not require the formal description of PV system, and as Jana presented before, they were indeed marked in red on our map. In Brazil, detailed description of pharmacovigilance system is required, and its structure is defined in pharmacovigilance guides for drug registration holders published 10 years ago. And again, Brazil is an observer of Arab League, but actually did not implement the Arab League principles. And only last year, Kenya published their guidelines on the safety and vigilance of medical products and health technologies, where PSMF is again required, and a detailed structure is provided in Annex 14, and again, the structure is very close to EU style. If applicable, the marketing authorization holder shall maintain both the global PSMF, which follows the EMA format, and the subsystem which describes key elements of PV activities in Kenya, both permanently and readily available to the QPPV, and also need to submit the copy of PSMF to agency not later than 7 days after receipt of the request. So let me finish the overview of legislation now. We just wanted to quickly set up the scene for more practical topics. So Jana, back to you.
Thank you very much, Marcela. And let's look a bit into forms of this description and availability to agencies. We could see from legislative requirements that the situation might be really, really complicated for global companies. Of course, looking at certain types of description, we might see that the most common approach is to follow GVP PSMS structure. We could see that it was applicable in the EU, of course, then somehow also in the UK, MENA countries, and EEA EU countries as well. Advantage might be that this EU PSMF is also applicable or acceptable for non-EU agencies on request. However, for EU PSMF, we know that certain territory, certain country is not described. I mean, now country outside the EU. So what and how we might do with this is that we might have specific annexes or specific description. We might add something. As I already mentioned, so in EU, it is not that easy that we would keep just one PSMF if we have registrations in France. If we have registration in France, so we have to have a certain description of situation on products registered in France, and of course how system is ensured for France, specifically for France. And we all know that within Pharmacovigilance System Master File, and now I'm talking about EU PSMF, there are a lot of sensitive information. We have information on all audits, on all findings, on specific people, on the structure of the organization, etc. So we have to be really careful how we will use EU PSMF. So we were talking about the most common structure, let's say, GVP PSMF structure. And we have also other types of structures, like Pharmacovigilance System Master File in India. And as Marcela already mentioned, so the name is exactly the same, while the abbreviation is not, and the content is not that similar to PSMF. Or we might have detailed description of pharmacovigilance system, as we already mentioned in Serbia, and this is a different structure of description of pharmacovigilance system. And then this is, let's say, more and more complicated in a way that we have certain legislation, then we have certain interpretation of the legislation, but there might be a bit different common practice. So it means that we really need local PV support to know and understand what and how PV system should be described. And I have a real example. When I was the EEA QPPV for one of our client, so headquarter was requested to send EU PSMF to Ukraine for submission with marketing authorization application. So it means to take EU PSMF and enter into dossier for marketing authorization application submission. I was not really happy about that, and after some discussions, we recommended Ukrainian affiliate to submit only summary of PSMF, because as I already mentioned, so there are a lot of sensitive information, and we have to be careful where and how to submit sensitive information. So we came to a common conclusion to submit European or EU summary of PSMF. And of course, in this case, I tried to require also legislation based on which this request was brought. And coming to availability to agencies, so typically this is on request. So PSMF is submitted on request, while summary of PSMF is part of dossier, at least in the EU. And we have to be ready to compile very quickly PSMF for agencies, or at least to have some sort of procedure how to compile or if to use the last version, etc. So we have also to understand the needs on submission and compilation. So now back to Marcela.
Thank you, Jana. Well, it was mentioned several times during this presentation that in this global world, the marketing authorization holder's description of the PV system in one country or region does not live alone, but is connected to other countries or regions where Max holds licenses for their products. So how we may organize different descriptions of the system around the world? First of all, we need to know where we start and where we want to go. So we need to revise current status. What is our starting point? Do we have any description of the PV system in place now? What country or region is covered? What is the structure of our current description? What is its location? What products are covered? Are we covering the same portfolio as we aim to? Where QPPV is located? Can QPPV serve as QPPV also for other regions we are gonna to add? All this is important when we will be defining the strategy for the expansion of the system. For example, are we adding MENA to EU? In such a case, at least structure is very much similar. However, if we wish to add India to EU, we need two documents which are very different. Are we adding EU to Eurasian Economic Union? Again, the structure of PSMF is similar. What are the required locations of the PSMF? Does country or region allow one main global PSMF and then local descriptions, as for example Arab countries do? We also need to take into account what is the business strategy of our company, commercial plans. That may help us in setting up long-term strategy for description of PV systems to come. We also need to consider the structure of our company. Do we have company affiliates with enough PV personnel in all countries? What is the connection between global and local offices? Also, what IT systems are in place? Do local functions have access to those? Can we use them for preparation, review, approval, sharing, and subsequent maintenance of the description? And last but not least, how are we going to collect the source data? It may look simple, but there is a lot of training of internal non-pharmacovigilance staff behind to explain and help them understand what is required for the description and that contribution from various different departments beyond pharmacovigilance is necessary. In general, there are two main options how to approach the management of description of pharmacovigilance systems in various countries and regions. One is centralized, when everything is under control of one central office, and the other one, decentralized, with a lot of delegation to local or regional offices. So let's see pros and cons of both. Let's start with centralized approach. In this scenario, the whole process and all connected sub-processes are managed centrally from one pharmacovigilance office. Also, all procedures describing all connected activities are managed centrally by experienced team fully dedicated to pharmacovigilance. There are definitely advantages in the terms of consistency and experience. On the other hand, there are certain aspects which may complicate this a lot, like administrative burdens and time-consuming process, for example, for collection of all relevant local data. So next slide shows possible models. In the first one, let's call it modular, there is a set of all modules which need to be prepared in all concerned countries or regions, and the local PSMF is composed only from modules relevant for a given country. The other one, let's call it shared, is suitable for situations when all countries are requiring the PSMF style of description. In such a scenario, we may go on with one central body of the PSMF and attach the country-specific annexes with the local specific information. The last example, let's call it specific, shows the situation when central office produces local specific PSMF composed from country-specific body and country-specific annexes. This may be suitable in situations when one region requires PSMF style and the other one completely different type of document like DDPS, Detailed Description of Pharmacovigilance System. However, the number of countries or regions may be a limiting factor for this approach. So, as we have seen, centralized approach has benefits and disadvantages. So let's see what the decentralized approach may bring. There is a lot of delegation in this scenario. All process is managed from local or regional level, as well as the procedures. In this setup, there is a need for periodic reconciliation of data between regional and local and global pharmacovigilance office. Otherwise, the global office may lose control. However, it's worth saying that in this setup, we may benefit from local know-how. And I am not talking only about written legislation, but as Jana mentioned before, I am talking also about the local understanding of expectation of national competent authority. This model is also very flexible if the description needs to be updated quickly. On the other hand, we cannot ignore potential threats, like diversity among individual countries, inconsistencies between global and local description, and also less routine in pharmacovigilance systems descriptions, or the fact that frequently local pharmacovigilance staff, especially in smaller countries, is combined also with other roles. So the setup in decentralized approach may look like this. There is a huge group of countries requiring PSMF style document. However, these individual descriptions may not be aligned between themselves. The other group may use DDPS style document or other structure. And if there is no strong connection to global PV, there may be different levels of details provided in descriptions, inconsistencies, or even conflicting information. Therefore, routine reconciliation is a must in this scenario. So that was all what we wanted to share. Filomena, do we have any questions in the chat?
Thanks, Marcela. That's great. Yes, we do. I can see that we've got quite a few questions that have come in while you've been presenting. So let's have a look at these now and see if we can answer a few of them in the time that we still have left. Okay, first question. Do we need to present products registered in non-EU territories in the EU PSMF? Jana, can I give you that question to answer, please?
Thank you very much for the question. So as I already mentioned, the structure and specific requirements for PSMF is in GVP module 2. And in this module, there is description also on which type of medicinal products we should keep in the PSMF. And so just a second, I will look. So the legislation says the list of medicinal products authorized in the EU should also include the authorization numbers, including per authorization. And fourth bullet point specifies that other non-EU territories where the product is authorized or on the market. So it means answer is yes. On the other hand, I can imagine that it might be a bit tricky with getting of proper information. In different countries or regions, there might be not really marketing authorizations granted. So it means that different type of registering of product might be applicable. So it means that there is authorized or on the market. And of course, the next thing is how to get proper information. And again, it depends on countries and on structure of the organization, how data are coming to the company. It might be, for example, regulatory affairs if they are global, or sometimes this in type of information also comes from finance department. So yeah, you can see that this is really complex approach and complex document.
Thanks, Jana. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Okay, what is your recommendation in a situation where the product is authorized in another country as a food supplement? That's an interesting question. Marcela, can I pass that one to you, please?
Okay, thank you. Well, this is actually a tricky one, because indeed there may be situations when the same product is registered in one country as a medicinal product and in the other as a food supplement. However, all what was described today relates to medicinal products and not to food supplements. So even if we list food supplement among the products in the annex of PSMF, as Jana was describing right now, the system actually does not apply. We do not collect adverse experiences in the same way as we do for medicinal products. We do not produce aggregate reports. So no, I would not recommend that.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, another question here. Does the EU QPPV need to be informed about the submission of the EU PSMF to non-EU countries? Jana, can I give that question to you, please?
Yes, I already mentioned it also in the presentation, at least somehow, how I was involved as EU QPPV in submission of PSMF in Ukraine. So definitely I would recommend to have at least some sort of oversight over the PV system. I don't assume that there is proper legislation specifying this. On the other hand, we might say that from GVP Module 1, EU QPPV should have oversight over the system. So maybe we can somehow involve it under this. So my decision would be, yes, I would like to be at least somehow informed about submission also to non-EU countries. And as I already said, I was not in agreement for submission of the whole PSMF in Ukraine for the specific client.
Thanks, Jana. Okay, I think we have time for just one more quick question. So how about, okay, can an EU QPPV serve as a QPPV for other regions? For example, the MENA region. Marcela, can I ask you to answer that, please?
Yeah, sure. There may be such a situation. For example, MHRA announced just a few weeks ago that QPPV may oversee also UK territory, as mentioned by Jana earlier. However, in that situation, MHRA expects national contact person for pharmacovigilance. And actually, this is also the expectation of MENA region. Arab League recognizes that there is a global PV system headed by QPPV, who is not located in the country. However, similarly to MHRA, they require a local safety responsible, so who resides in the respective country. So EU QPPV to some extent may serve as QPPV for other regions like in UK. However, the expectation of majority of agencies is that they have in such a situation a strong local presence, and sometimes not only local QPPV but also local PSMF. Actually, this is a good question, and we were considering to have a specific webinar on this topic because this may be indeed confusing.
Great, thanks, Marcela. And thank you both for your excellent answers. So unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. I can see that we've actually still got quite a few questions sitting here, and we would like to answer everyone who has taken the time to ask us. So we'll endeavour to reply personally by email to all outstanding questions by the end of next week. And now to conclude our webinar session for today, we would like to thank everyone once again for joining us. We really hope you found this webinar useful. And to remind you, this webinar will be available for download from the PrimeVigilance and Ergomed websites from tomorrow. This ends our webinar. Thank you very much for attending.